Good morning, everyone. I'm Chad Coolis, Executive Director of the Midway Chamber of Commerce. Today is part two of our five-part Economic Development Summit. Today's topic is community. Last week we had careers, and that is still available. You can listen to it, and we're going to be able to have all five of these parts be able to be listened to afterwards. So they live on afterward, which is great. So you don't just have to be here at the moment. I want to just thank our sponsor today. It's McDonald's. And if you remember, they may be a large company, but they also have franchisees. And the Henry family is the franchisee locally in St. Paul. They own, I believe, all the McDonald's in the city and at the airport. So Courtney and Lewis Henry are big supporters of the Midway community. So it made a lot of sense for them to be the sponsor for today. Friendly reminder to put yourself on mute and to also use the chat. If you have questions, put it in the chat. Either myself or Don will be able to see that. And most of the questions are going to be answered toward the end, just so you're aware about that. And at this point, I will turn it over to our moderator from Evolve Systems. Please welcome Don Raleigh.
Hey everyone, my name is Don Raleigh III from Evolve Systems. Just wanted to say thank you for joining us on this Thursday morning. I currently sit on the Economic Development Committee and working with the fellow business owners to come together through the chamber by bringing you content that is topical, timely, beneficial, and catered to each of your businesses. I kind of have a personal tie to this topic of community because I am an actual living member of the Midway community. I live just off of Hamlin and Sherburne, which is where I'm sitting out of now. I live less than a mile away from the Midway Chamber of Commerce, and so I felt a personal connection to this topic. I'm very excited to moderate today's panel. Today we're going to be discussing the topic all around community during the COVID-19 crisis, how the community has shifted, how we have had to pivot, and what some of the fellow business owners are doing to really change how they're conducting business with the current pandemic going on. So my team at Evolve Systems and I have seen quite a transition as well with what our communities look like as everyone in business world has gone and make the tough transitions into an online virtual world. As a digital agency ourselves, we've seen that the importance of having a partner that can actually support you and be there for businesses that are in need of that pivot is vital to the success of an organization. People have more time at home. They're making more and more purchases online at their storefronts, and they're searching for local companies to work with. Now more than ever is your website's organic search engine optimization important for your company's success. Evolve Systems is a proud Midway Chamber member, and we are currently helping several members with a variety of marketing services to help grow their businesses and communities during this crisis. A few housekeeping items that, as Chad shared before, this is a live session and we'll be having you on mute during the presentation. However, you can submit your questions through the chat feature and we'll be answering the questions at the end. That being said, it's my pleasure and opportunity to introduce the panelists that will be sharing their insights on what the community looks like currently, in the future, and what their thoughts are on how great businesses are doing in today's world. So our first panelist is Catherine Reid Day, who is the founder of Story Slices LLC, a story-based creative agency working in the intersection of story and purpose. I love that statement. Story Slices assists people and businesses grow in their future how they want. Her office is located at Dow Street, or Dow Artist Building on University Avenue. We're practically neighbors, Catherine. Catherine has served as vice president for the McAllister and Carleton Colleges, as well as the Minnesota Children's Museum. As senior VP at PRI, she developed distinctive public radio programs, including Marketplace and The World. Her work as a producer has won acclaim, including Telly Award for the best use of music in a Peabody nomination for the PBS show Mental Engineering, which she co-produced and distributed to 150 PBS stations. Think about the logistics and how she was able to rally community behind that. It's fantastic. As a community organizer at heart, Catherine serves as a co-founder and board chair for the St. Paul's Creative Enterprise Zone, which is a community-based nonprofit in district working advance creative and cultural economic development. An AP certified Ego District practitioner, she also serves on the board of Minneapolis-St. Paul's Towerside Innovation District. In 2018, she was appointed by the St. Paul's Mayor Carter to the city's Business Review Council. She's the creator and host of the Augsburg University podcast. Her research has been published in the Journal of Individual Psychology and has been featured in the Star Tribune and MinnPost. Oh my goodness. I think that's one of the most impressive introductions that we've had throughout this entire series for the Midway Chamber. And I frankly kind of seen some of the content, and I've gotten the chance to listen to a couple of the podcasts that Catherine's put out. She has a really great pulse on community and what's going on in our neighborhoods. So I'm excited to hear what she says. Our second panelist is a dear friend of mine, John Keimig. John is the director of the University of St. Thomas Family Business Center and the only resource in the educational industry of its kind in our state. John works with families and advisors to understand the challenges facing family businesses and creates programming to address these unique needs and elevate family business, the overall ecosystem. The center's programming has reached over more than 150 different family businesses each year, including Midway Chamber members like Evolve Systems, Ideal Printers, and Meritex. While most families come from the Twin Cities area, regular attendees travel from outside Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and all over the place to attend the program. And I believe there was even a time where a family business from Italy came in and had a great presentation about how business is done over there. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for being here, Catherine and John. To start off the panel discussion, I want to kick the conversation off with asking Catherine, what are your thoughts on what the Midway community story looks like to you? How have you seen the Midway community grow, and how were you introduced to the Midway community?
Well, thanks for having me. I think that the Midway community right now is responding exactly the way we would expect from a community that is so at the heart of what we are as a community. So I see the response as a little bit gritty, really true to our personality, authentic, innovative, and responsive. And so as I think about the stories that I've been seeing and hearing, I'm impressed with, as you use the word pivot, the way that our pivot has included, maybe first has been from heart, that we have acknowledged that there is suffering. We're not ignoring the fact that there is that we're hurting, and so that the response. I think about Studio Distilling, Urban Growler, and everyone who's decided to convert their capacity into hand sanitizer. I mean, they didn't stop there. It's actually forming a team to go out and distribute the resources in the community. I think about Junket Tossed and Found, which is a brand new to our community, actually used to be based over where the riots are happening right now, but they moved into, now I can't think of the name of the building, but the old Geological Services building. And they have they're very committed to repurposing and reuse, and they are now doing a lot of mask making, and very entrepreneurial response. So I think that the stories are going to continue to evolve very rapidly, and I think that you're going to see the root of innovation at the heart of how we're going to respond. I also, have seen, we're a very creative community. That's why we founded the Creative Enterprise Zone. Very innovative. We're the only creative enterprise zone in the state. The only other creative enterprise zones that we know about are in London, and they, took our name and our identity to innovate around global creativity. And I think the two organizations that I serve on, it's no coincidence that they're about innovation and creativity, because I think when we think about what grows here, it's what we grow here comes from the essence of our roots as a community. And so what we're growing in, say, for example, in the Wycliffe building, are organizations and companies that respond to the community. And so that's So that's a brief overview of what I've been thinking about and seeing.
That's wonderful. And John, how about yourself? How have you seen the Midway community grow since you were introduced to St. Thomas? And what are some of your connections to the Midway community?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for reading off my bio after Catherine's. That was a real nice thing for me to follow that. I grew up in White Bear Lake and then moved to Wisconsin and Iowa and came back to Minnesota 7 years ago and lived in the northern suburbs. So for me, the Midway community is a little different. I used to have swim meets at the Midway Y back in the day. But now I work in Minneapolis, so there's different pockets around the Twin Cities that I'm not as familiar with. Midway is one, though. Growing up on the eastern side, Minneapolis was foreign to me as a White Bear Lake kid. But what I've seen recently is a lot of growth. Obviously with Allianz Field, kind of right on the border there, and that's exciting to see what impact that will have in the Midway community. I certainly don't have the in-depth knowledge Catherine does about all of the companies that are there. Some of the companies like Ideal Printers that you mentioned earlier and Meritex have been members of ours for quite some time. The Meritex family actually started our family business center almost 30 years ago. And Patty McNeely, who's the CEO there, is still our board chair. And the Meritex, the McNeely family is very heavily involved in the east side of St. Paul. That's my kind of loose connection to the Midway area. Other than that, Catherine, you talk about some of the distilleries changing over to working on hand sanitizer. That's great. In that same vein, Lake Monster has been a favorite place of ours, kind of right on the edge there too. Reid Kenworth's another family business that was located right in the Midway community, and it just got to be a little too tough for them with all the trucks coming in and how busy it was. So they've actually moved out. And so that'll be an interesting thing to see as the community continues to develop and change. If there are other entities that have been there a long time, they were there, 80 years, that do move in or out. So it'll be interesting to follow as things keep changing, and hopefully the community, the companies that are there can solidify themselves for the long haul here.
I think that's a really fair sentiment to say, John. When I think of Reid Kenworth, I think of how they had such a great opportunity in the space that they had that allowed them to grow to what the company they are today. Mm-hmm. If you think about all the different types of businesses in Midway, we don't just see small businesses staying small. We see these companies growing and flourishing and doing great things. Catherine, I'm sure with the creative economic zone, you're seeing all sorts of growth and opportunity in the business community as well.
Yeah, actually, that is the story I love to tell. I mean, it's difficult to anticipate how this change is going to affect everyone, but really we were always talking about the rapid growth of the creative industries in the neighborhood. We would highlight, and we have a very broad view of what we include under that creative lens, because for example, the recycling is an innovation. It's a form of creative innovation, and so obviously the way Tech Dump has been growing. Ecological landscapes and the purchasing of buildings, where to create new homes for creative businesses. We weren't just seeing individual businesses growing. What we've been seeing is that whole buildings are moving in the direction of being innovative, creative, and entrepreneurial. And one of the things, I have been asked to speak at a number of different conferences about the work we're doing. And one of the things that my colleague, Tom Borup, who was the first consultant who worked with us on the Creative Enterprise Zone, is to remind us, how many Fortune 500 companies there are in Minnesota. And I'm guessing somebody, I don't know, John, you must know, right?
No.
No, okay. Well, I'm going to say 16 or 17. I don't know. Somebody else can tell me if I'm right. But then the next question that we ask when we're talking about the work we do is, how many of them were recruited to Minnesota? Does anyone know the answer to that?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, big zero.
Yeah.
And and that's really at the heart of the point of why we do the work we do, is that, you know, businesses that are successful grow here. And you don't know what the next Fortune 500 might be. And we've been incredibly successful in the state of Minnesota. As Governor Wall says, as this winter descended on us, you know, one of the things that came to my mind was that we have such a diverse environment of businesses. And that's one of the greatest strengths of our community, is that it's not one sector that we've grown. And I think one of the things that I noticed when we had the panel with Reid is that there was a missing element in talking about the strength of our community. And that missing element is the power of the creative economy in Minnesota. It is actually larger than agriculture. And we tend to think of ourselves as an agricultural state. And part of why I bring up the London Mayor's effort around creative enterprises is that being a globally creative community is one of the greatest assets that we have to offer. And I think it's especially important now, because what we're going to have to do is reinvent ourselves again. And everyone's going to have to use different powers actually to make that happen. And it won't simply be our tenacity. It won't simply be our resilience. And I just want to say I'm deliberately emphasizing that, because those are qualities that are incredibly important to who we are. And we're going to need imagination. And it's going to be the power of imagination and the power of all of our senses, if you will, is going to help us through this process. So, you know, I think one of the things we've been able to contribute to the community through the Creative Enterprise Zone was the first mural festival for the state of Minnesota. And last fall we installed, gosh, I'm tired today, 10 murals in 8 days, you know, with 15 artists at work. The impact that has had continues to amaze me, because it's creating curiosity. It's encouraging a spirit of connectedness. It's inviting people into spaces that they don't always explore. And again, those are themes that I think are critical to how we're going to respond as a community. It's not just the murals. It's the notion that it lifts our spirits, it beautifies spaces, it makes public space more inviting. It's another thing we're working on, is that the need for public spaces is going to grow exponentially. And how we actually use that public space and how we continue to make it safe and a place where people will continue to bump into each other, which is a factor in creativity and innovation. These are really important things. And so those happen to be the areas we've put our stake in the ground around. We've just finished a task force work with the US Bank site in Krause-Anderson. We held some community meetings about that. When we first saw the design, we had some ideas of our own about what we wanted to see happen there. It's been a really great ongoing conversation, and we just kind of concluded that work with the designs going to the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission. Krause-Anderson really adapted their plans significantly based on community input. That included more public space. It's going to include a more welcoming front door to keep the historic roots of our commercial district alive and thriving. And it also is going to include some commercial space that might be devoted to an innovation hub. So we're really excited about those things. But again, I'll give specifics, but I also want to say, you know, these qualities of who we are as people and how we draw those out from one another is absolutely crucial right now. And we intend to be part of that conversation.
That's wonderful. And I think that's a perfect segue into the next question. This one, I kind of have a lot of a tie to just being a member of the Midway community. But I've seen a lot of neighbors coming together in innovative ways by doing those murals, doing those sidewalk chalk art. I love walking my dog around the different parks and seeing all the different just beautiful art and fun things that people are doing. Seeing on different community pages on Facebook that people are donating and even making masks and bringing them to elder care centers here in the Midway, and putting together sign-up sheets for delivering supplies to people who are in need or susceptible to succumbing to the disease. It's really inspiring to see how people are coming together. And I wanted to see from that actual people side, not necessarily the business side, how are you seeing that people are coming together? Catherine, do you want to start?
Well, I was just talking all the time. I think one of the things I really miss right now is I don't live in the creative enterprise zone. I office there, and I spend a huge amount of my time up there normally. And right now I'm reintroducing myself to my own neighborhood. I've been a stranger to it for a long time, but well, a couple of things I'll mention. One is that Forecast Public Art, which has been one of our partners, is also located in the enterprise zone, also put out a call. They contributed $10,000 and made 10 $500 awards to activate artists to do community projects that would really be about hope. They also did a second round. They've been fundraising for the second round, and they plan to institute some additional ones. And all of that is to employ artists to activate public spaces and to do some expression very much in more formally, if you will, in the vein that you're talking about. I think the thing I've been really noticing in my own space, I've been walking a lot of alleys. The river is just too busy for me. I've been wandering down the alleyways, and I'm seeing a lot of really great things. And I feel like someone else said to me, I feel like it's a return to my own childhood. A little bit more free range, a lot more people out. And I'm hearing stories and conversations. I'm hearing laughter. I'm seeing little informal displays in alleys of children's art. And I think these are signs of great health for us that we want to keep highlighting. I was in a conversation with one of our local reporters yesterday. She approached me two fronts, one to do some stories about what we're doing in the enterprise zone, but also to ask me about my core work around storytelling. And we're exploring an idea that I actually had 10 years ago, which is to do sort of a story catching idea using mason jars and an installation where we might capture some of the stories on the street corner, if you will. So we'll see if we get that pulled together. But I think there's a lot of rejuvenation in that opportunity to have slowed down, pay attention to the things that build our own personal structures, whether that be an individual or a family, and taking that outward into community, I think will actually foster some new businesses.
I totally agree with that. And John, I'd love to see your perspective on how people are coming together, not necessarily just in the Midway community itself, but with your experience in dealing with small family businesses across the entire state. How do you think people are managing their employees? How do you think the people element of our businesses are being affected, and how are things changing with people?
Yeah, hugely. When this all happened, I was in Florida when this started because 12, 13 years ago, my wife and I said, someday we got to go to Florida and watch the Twins play in spring training. And we're still saying someday we have to go to Florida and watch the Twins play in spring training. So we didn't exactly get to see a game while we were there. But while I was gone, St. Thomas announced that, no in-person events through April 14th. And I had an event that was supposed to take place, and I had to, kind of email out to our audience and say, hey, this is canceled. And that was a really hard decision to make, which was kind of funny now that we look back at those, hard decisions that we had to make then, and now they were all so easy. But one of the things I did is once we got home, I worked a couple days, and then I took a good Saturday morning, and I reached out to probably 100 family businesses and just said, what's going on? What are the pain points? What do you need? What can we support you with? And one of the biggest concerns was about employees. Right. Now that my employees are working from home, I don't know how to meet their needs. I don't know how to interact with them. They're scared. We're scared. How do I lead when I'm scared? And so one kind of small thing we did over time was try to reach out to these families and not just ask what's going on that's a struggle, but what's going well for you. So in the Family Business Center, we get, typically we do these kind of monthly events where we get about 200 people together, and they're all from family businesses. So there's no advisors, no bankers, attorneys, anyone looking to drum up any business. I refer to it as Switzerland. It's our neutral, safe place to talk about family business issues, and everyone that's there gets it. And so that is obviously missing now. So we started doing some webinars to meet some of these needs, like the PPP and new HR laws, things like that were really kind of the business pressure. Hey, we need to find out these types of things so we can survive. But then as soon as we had an opportunity, I put together a panel of business owners that were sharing stories of what was going well. One person, in that first email I had sent out from Florida, I talked about 5 strengths of family business that these families can lean on in tough times. And this person said I don't remember the exact quote, but it was essentially the most impactful exercise he'd ever done was going through those things and plotting his family and business into those strengths. And then his employees said, hey, you need to record that and share that with all the employees. And so he ended up doing that. And this is an introvert times 10. And so it was hard for him, but he was able to take those lessons and push them down to his employees as a way to reassure them. Another family business that I had speak on this event he was deemed essential and they were making PPE. And he told his employees, our parents and grandparents, might have fought in different wars. This is our war, and this is our job on the front lines. And so you kind of had 2 different perspectives of how to talk with employees. But a few weeks after that, I reached out to all these companies again, and there was even more of a need on the employee side. So I went back and said, hey, what are you doing well? And so we put together just a list of things that companies were doing well, just to kind of rally the troops a little bit. One company, Gamer Packaging in Minneapolis, who, again, following up on Catherine's, they make bottles for the alcohol industry. And so they switched to making large bottles for hand sanitizer, which was really cool. And they're one of the businesses that is doing really well through this. But one thing they did is they had a competition, the best home office competition, and they awarded cash prizes. And then they had a best colleague competition. So if it was their kid or their pet or whatever that was in their Zoom shot. So they really try to kind of create that family atmosphere. And later on, they actually gave all their employees a gift card to use at a favorite restaurant to support their own community. So those are some of the cool things I've seen where the companies are really putting their employees first. That's really common with small business and family business where they care so much about their employees. And that was really put on display the last couple months because that seemed to be the big pain point that these families had. Like they were going to deal with the money stuff later is what it really felt like. How do we take care of our people? Then we'll figure out kind of all the business stuff.
Yeah, I really think that's an important topic to highlight of how the overall conversation has really changed, not necessarily away from profit, but people are being highlighted. People are remembering that at the end of the day, profits will be there, maybe, maybe not, but people will be. There will always be people, and we have to support our employees. And I think that that's one of the highlights that's going to come out of this pandemic is that people are really thinking of how best they can engage their employees. And I really appreciate your perspective on sharing that information, John. Thank you.
I want to jump in on that if I can. Simply because I love the examples you gave. I think that's what must have been a really valuable session for people. One of the things that I know from my work with family businesses is research really shows that that ability to do storytelling and create meaning through generations of different experiences is incredibly powerful. And I just want to give a brief example because it's been something that has helped. I have a 24-year-old daughter, and my mother, who's 91 and is living over in Episcopal Homes, commented to my husband, I think, that we had someone who died of the Spanish flu. And I'd never heard her say that before. Now, I was kind of confused because it was actually the way she relayed it was kind of confused. And then it made me, I thought, oh, I know who she's talking about. Well, my father had a sibling who died in 1918, not in 1919, a baby. So I always knew about David, but I had never made the connection between that story and the flu. And then I happened to pull out the family history and found an incredibly beautiful photograph, which was probably the first photograph taken of that baby. And it was our whole family on the island. My father grew up on an island in the Cedar River in Waterloo, Iowa. And so they were on this island. The baby is being held. It's multi-generational. And I really had never studied that photograph. And in the end, what I said to my daughter was, yes, they lost baby David, but all the rest of those people lived on and they carried on. And that's why we have our family story, is that the generation came after. So they endured. And I thought of all the things my grandmother endured, the losses she experienced. And that was the first of a series of she lost 2 children. But my point was that, and part of what I want to say is that I think there are any number of stories in the illustration you just gave. And research shows that when you it's called an oscillating story, meaning we have hardship. Here's how we deal with hardship. Here's what happens as we come through that hardship. And so it's that oscillating narrative that is the most powerful and potent one that actually fuels business forward, is helping people see, well, look at how many of them, endured. And for my daughter, who was terribly frightened of losing her parents, and, her grandfather died last week of COVID. We're, grieving as a family. It's very helpful to remember that many of them endured. And so that work you're doing with those family businesses is really important.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that too, this first email I had sent out, one of the things for families to talk about was looking to the past for guidance. So it's like what you're saying, what other challenges have you overcome? And then how do you tell those stories to others? Family businesses, many of them have been around a long time. We've got 2 families in our center that have been around longer than Minnesota's been a state. And even next week, we're doing a panel discussion of 3-century families that can talk about, and one of them is Yingling Beer, which is out in Pennsylvania or New York, one of the 2. They're the oldest brewery in the country. Well, they lived through Prohibition. How does a brewery make it through Prohibition? These are some tough challenges. And so that is where I think, family business specifically, but small business too, can look at those things and say, this is what has worked for us. This is who we are. If mom and dad could make it through, this part of life, these tough challenges, we can too. And that's something we teach our families. Is we have a class on governance, which is how family, business, and ownership all works together. And we force them to have family meetings. And the first family meeting we have them tell is their founding story.
Right.
So everybody, generations down, understands that, maybe this is a great business right now that generates a lot of income and, provides a certain lifestyle. But guess what? It wasn't always that way. And so we're really big on reaching back into the history and telling the stories and learning the values from our founders and how they passed down, and then how current employees and family, and primarily the family, but then down to the employees, can lean on those values and lean into them and say, this is who we are and this is how we're going to make it through this tough situation based on who we are.
That's really great. I want to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit back into the Midway area. And Catherine, I'd love your perspective on this question. How do you see community growing through this pandemic? And what are some of the ways that Midway is growing? And what does growth mean to you? I know that growth can be a really diverse word to use when describing how a community is really developing. How are some ways that you're seeing the Midway developing and growing?
Well, I think I want to jump on the last part of our conversation because I think what I really see is that we're going to grow based on our values. And so we're going to need to remember what those are, and we're probably going to need to refresh them. Um, I can't help but be I couldn't sleep last night, and I'm personally know some people who are probably lost their business yesterday, and the very, we need to be shaken to our roots to understand that our values are going to have to shift, and we're going to have to respond as a community with a different sense of growth, in my view. I actually think that's what this whole transition is about. I really admire, and I'm not going to be able to say her name, but she talked about this as a portal into what we actually want to build. And I think that the opportunity is we are being confronted with that opportunity to decide how we're going to grow. And we as an organization, the Enterprise Zone, really are thinking of what opportunities are there for us to respond. And so I think, there's a question on the chat about how are the spaces going to change. We've recently launched a real estate division of the organization, really focusing on helping people find spaces to grow creative businesses, creative and innovative businesses. And what we're finding is kind of like my US Bank example, is that we really believe in having a dialogue about what we do value and why we value it and what we're trying to grow. And that has been educational, not just for them, but for us. I mean, we see our job as in part to be educating about why we think this sector is so important to the future of the area. I think, that the roots, the particular mix of what this Midway is, the transportation, the history of our transportation, the history of the river, and to not forget that we are connected to the river here, to think of ourselves as a watershed, and the metaphor of a watershed and what that means, to recognize our roots in manufacturing, to recognize that this was a place that people that people went west from. There's a reason why it's called Transfer Road. So anyway, those are all. So I think that our growth will, of necessity, be from values and to connect the dots around opportunities. We will be. We are in conversation with one building owner right now who has, because of our relationship and because of how we got to know each other through the Mural Festival, is going to be working with us on a very specific project to bring attention to that building and to make it more of a beacon of creative entrepreneurship and to signal it as a headquarters. So it gives us a way to express why, as a community, we think making creativity visible is so important. That it fuels new ideas, it inspires us. But that will be one of the ways in which we'll grow some things. We're also looking into some, again, I talked about public spaces. We have an idea that we're planning to grow around developing some parklets that will also help us grow trees in the neighborhood, because we are a heat island and we need to address the climate issues. And so bringing together growing trees, activating people around community service that can connect the dots to saying this, caring for our community is all of our job. So those are things that we expect to grow. But I think that what I'm seeing is that the Midway, in its own distinctive way, is seeing that through talking to each other like we are now, that you can find new ways to cooperate and collaborate. And I think that cooperation and collaboration are going to be really vital to helping us grow.
I love that you said that. I could not agree more. I found that we're starting to have more of a dialogue instead of just conversations, or I guess just speaking to each other. We're having more really in-depth conversations of how to help each other. And that human element is something that I think is going to be a huge cultural shift in our overall mentality when it comes to not only the Midway community, but the business community, and overall in Minnesota, that cultural shift is going to be happening. John, I'd love to hear your perspective on some of the businesses that you've worked with. How are some of the different cultural shifts happening in the different businesses? Are there any different things that you're going to be seeing, or things that we're going to be seeing in this air quotation marks new normal post-pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question about that. You know, when you talk about growth, I look at, you know, restaurants, for them, growth is being around in 6 months. And you look at other industries that, you know, maybe had to ramp up. I think of home gyms. You know, they had a big ramp up 2 months ago. What do they look like 3 months from now, when everybody already has their home gym and maybe can go back to their own gym and is trying to, you know, sell their stuff on Craigslist. So I think growth is really kind of dependent on industry specific and what they're seeing. The thing I'm seeing, and from some of these webinars we've hosted and stuff, is, you know, business owners are being told, hey, you know, go negotiate with your landlord, go negotiate with your suppliers. Okay, but there's somebody on the other side of that that is now having to give something, or having to be the bad person and say, no, we can't negotiate because we're in the same boat you are. So I think one of the big things I'm seeing is grace. That, you know, the mantra of we're all in this together. And I think as business owners really are in it together, and people are trying to do what they can to support each other. And sometimes that means you might be, you know, deferring collections for 30 days, 60 days, whatever, out of the goodness of your heart, or because, you know, this entity will fold if you are requiring that they pay in 30 days. So I think that grace is the main one I'm seeing, and it does tie directly back into, you know, how Catherine was ending her comments. It's the compassion and the understanding, and we're all knocked back a little bit. And earlier Catherine mentioned, you know, kind of hearkening back to, you know, years ago and how life was. I mean, how many bonfires have we had in our yard? We had to buy a second hammock because our kids are fighting over the one hammock because we're just kind of stuck at home. But it just does give you more of that family time. And I think that's where the values are taught. And I've got 3 little kids, 8, 4, and 2. And so I'm definitely in that values teaching mode of life. And so I'm just trying to take a positive spin on all this, as hard as it is. And, you know, I'm working in my kids' playroom right now. But it's just, how do you find the silver linings, either as a business owner or as a human? And I think it's getting easier in a way, but it's also getting harder in a way, because we don't know when things will go back to normal. My wife's a school teacher, and she desperately wants to get back to normal this fall. But I think things are less scary than they were 2 months ago, just from the human element. But, you know, I think for me, part of growth is getting back to my office, which hopefully happens in September, and seeing what we can do and how we can impact family businesses. And then I work in our School of Entrepreneurship, and how do we impact our undergrad students and give them the same education, or hopefully better education, because we're being forced to be creative and innovative. You know, I'm taking a look at our fall programming for family businesses, and I'm saying, well, this kind of stinks. We don't do anything online. It's so much about being in the room. Well, I've got an ask out to a very well-known international family business scholar to see if, hey, you know, you're in Singapore, but maybe we could make something work here, and it's not going to cost me an arm and a leg. So I think it's kind of taking a look at, you know, how do we adapt? And instead of saying, you know, this is really hard, how do we find those opportunities and make something new and unique that we wouldn't be able to do a year ago?
I can really appreciate that.
Can I jump on 2 things? Before you ask, I just want to jump on 2 things. One is that I'm not piling on you, but I was thinking, you know, you said this is the time when you're teaching values. I just wanted to say yes, 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 and also it doesn't end.
Sure.
You know, that, I mean, I remember people saying, you know, my 24-year-old needs me a lot right now to sort out for her you know, where to remind her of what we've agreed to about as a family and so forth. And again, I need to be reconnected to them, you know. So I just want to say, I think it's just a life cycle that we always need to go back to those core roots. And like you, I do a lot of work with founding stories, origin stories. You know, the work I did for the Augsburg podcast was rooted in work I did 7 years ago, really helping understand how they used to talk about themselves as an organization and how they talk about themselves now. And what I want to say too is that we transform our stories based on where we're trying to get to. You know, we need to remember that being guided by a vision is one of the most powerful things we can do. And to say that where we want to go, what we're standing for, is aiming in a direction, and that's how we grow. And so in that case example, Augsburg used to talk about itself as being just a bunch of poor preachers and social workers and not having any capacity, essentially no wealth. And we started talking, we changed the language and talked about generosity, and we talked about belief. And in those very simple phrases that we turned to, which were also at the root of who those people were, you know, those founding people came with a set of generous values when they came to this country. And so in turning that around, they turned their fundraising around. And so the origin story and those values really deserve to be examined and then guided in the direction you want to go. The other thing I wanted to jump on is that one of the really special things that happened in the last few months for us for the Creative Enterprise Zone is that we had 2 classes of students look at us really closely. And so there was a group of students at the university in a design class that studied us and looked at us as an as a place. And one of the really thrilling things out of that is there are at least 2 students that I can't wait to work with because they had such powerful visions of what we could become. And so I'm super inspired by a generation of scholars looking at us and studying us and then applying their thinking to us. And then I also was a guest lecturer for the president of Augsburg, always does a capstone class. And he and Jay Waldasper invited me to be a speaker at that. And Jay just sent me a note saying that every one of the students just chose to write about the Creative Enterprise Zone as their subject, and that they were so inspired by what we were doing. And, you know, it's really good to hear that. You get discouraged yourself and you think, ay. But to have, you know, 10 or 12 students say, we're inspired. So now I'm asking we hope in our next newsletter, we'll be able to interview a few of the students and ask them what they were inspired by. And I hope that we'll be able to share that with you all, because I haven't seen the papers. I don't know what they were inspired by. But it's exciting to work with another generation of leaders.
I think that itself could be whole nother conversation. I think you should have a conversation with Chad about potentially having your own independent event just to talk about those papers, because I'm interested as well. I know that we're kind of running short on time, and I'm seeing a lot of really great questions in the chat, but I wanted to, I think this is one of the more important questions for the presentation itself. Both of you are in a kind of somewhat of an advising role for your clientele. And during these times of uncertainty, what advice do you give to your clients, as well as that you'd give to the Midway community, on how to deal with the trauma and stress? What are some advice that you have for businesses going through this uncertainty? John, would you take a start?
Sure, yeah. So I don't personally do any advising. There's enough good advisors like Catherine out there in the community that do work day to day. So I'm just one guy in the Family Business Center. But, you know, the thing I would say is kind of what we've touched on already is harken back to the values and make sure that, you know, the thing about family business is that they're not working for the next quarter, they're working for the next generation. And so keeping that long-term perspective in mind, you know, again, we teach families to have a family mission, a family vision, and a family values, and how to translate that to the business side. So it's harder now to have family meetings, but it's probably more important than ever to have family meetings. So families are meeting on Zoom and things like that to really talk about the ownership issues, not the day-to-day, but, refocusing, resituating themselves within their system of values. And that's what guides you. And like Catherine said, with the vision too, of where you want to go. And now's the time for companies to say, okay, this was our old self. That's never coming back in the way it once was. We're kind of in the middle now, going through this change, and we've got to identify some opportunities and gaps of what we could become in the future. And that's hard. The good news is, though, everybody that essentially owns a business, every business was started by an entrepreneur, and you hope that entrepreneurial spirit, at least, is still with the leaders of the company. So people that can look at a problem and say, okay, here's a problem, let's find a solution. Here's a problem, let's find a solution. Focus in on the strengths, and shed some of the stuff that maybe isn't going as well, or maybe put off some of those pie in the sky ideas that don't make sense in the current time.
I really appreciate that perspective. Catherine, do you have any notes to share?
Yeah, I think one of the things to build on that, I would just say listening is really important right now. I've found that is really necessary. In part, I think we have to find spaces where it's okay to say what we're afraid or sad about. I guess that's part of why I've said it a couple times today, that I'm sad today. That vulnerability that we're feeling is universal. And so to pretend that we're not feeling vulnerable, to pretend that we're not frightened, I don't think is going to work. I think we got to, and I fear for our mental health and the trauma that we're going through. I am a psychologist, and I think that there's going to be just a huge, huge need for us to support each other. So I embrace vulnerability more than I ever used to, and I think that listening, not to fix things, but to listen, is one of the most important things we can do. So listening and just being open to that is going to be really helpful to your employees, to anyone you're working with. And if you can share that you're not trying to fix something for other people, that you're just there to be there for them, is the beginning and the opening to solutions. I gave the talk for the co-op, their annual meeting last year, and I presented, there's a question about how the rest of the community is going to look at us, and fear and all the things that we're dealing with. And I just want to address that. And it's based on my research I was trained as an Adlerian psychologist, and Alfred Adler was a peer to Jung and to Freud, but is lesser known. And his work actually is at the root of Maslow's hierarchy. But Adler would have been very upset about the notion of a hierarchy, because when I draw my map of how I think about community, it's a circle. And every one of us has three basic needs as human beings, and it's to feel safe, to feel we belong, and to feel we matter. And the way we learn that is through community. And I talked at the co-op talk about how the co-op exemplifies all of those. That, Chad and I talked about, he had popped in the co-op when we were exchanging ideas. I think that at the co-op, I feel a sense of family. I feel a sense of belonging. They truly make me feel I matter. Their soup is nourishing, and it feeds me beyond my tummy. It feeds my whole spirit when I eat their food, because it's made with love. And that is what we're here to do as a community, is to help people. Again, in the circle I draw is the center of the circle is a heart, and then there are those three components. How do we feel safe? How do we feel we matter? How do we feel we belong? And the way we learn it is the circle of community. And we are a circle of community, and we have the opportunity to help people who don't understand the inner city and why we love it, understand that it is safe to be here. And we can transform that through our own work. And you need to think of yourself as a beacon of both that vulnerability, but also that strength to say we are connected in community and this is where I feel I matter. And I'd like to invite you into that. And that's what I think the Midway Chamber is about, is inviting people into the sense of why we think this is so important.
Wow. There's so many great quotes that I wish I could just pull out of that and get a tattoo of it. I mean, just that was spectacular. I wanted to, we're coming up on the closing time, and I really wanted to get to the questions, but I wanted to give Catherine and John an opportunity to talk about anything going on in their business that would help benefit the Midway Chamber members. So John, do you have any things going on in your world that you want to talk to the members for anything going on in your world?
Sure. Starting 2 months ago, we started doing these webinars free for the community, for family businesses, entrepreneurs, whoever. And I mentioned it briefly. We talked about PPE and loans and HR policies and managing self through change and managing a team, remotely. We have one more webinar today. If anyone's interested, it's at 11. It's about how to adapt your business strategy. If you are interested, shoot me an email, familybusiness@stthomas.edu, and I can get you that information. But we're going to talk about, what's your purpose as an owner or executive in this pandemic? What competitive advantages can you build? Who do you need to work with? What have you done or not done to lead effectively? We're going to have our regular family business programming this fall, but I see the time and I don't want to drone on about that. But that's something that for family businesses might be of interest as well.
Yeah, and we got a little bit of flexibility in the time. I know that we end at around 9:30 or so, but I really want to address the questions in the chat and give some time for open dialogue and Q&A.
Sure.
So,
well,
Catherine.
Let me follow up with one more thing on what Catherine was saying, talking about vulnerability and listening. We had somebody who was a psychologist come and speak this last year at a highly attended event. She had more people there than when we had Jack Nicklaus in talking about his family business, because the topic was how to have difficult conversations. And if you guys haven't seen, there's a video, if you Google nail in the head, there's a quick 2-minute video that really shows listening at a very high level. And it was really impactful. And my wife actually came to that event too, to watch. And I really kind of changed the way I listen to my spouse and to others. And so I encourage you to Google nail in the head, and it's 2 minutes that will make you laugh and make you go, huh.
Yeah, I remember that session, how to have the difficult conversation. Man, that was
it was good.
I've never had to sit down with my parents after one of those sessions and say, hey, are we okay? And that just created a great dialogue. If you get the chance to sign up for a couple of the St. Thomas Family Business Center webinars, I highly encourage it. John, we'll try to get something in the follow-up email.
Sure.
And thank you for posting it in the chat.
Yeah, that didn't come up well. Go ahead.
Catherine, I wanted to pose the same question over to you. Is there anything that you have going on right now that you'd like to offer to membership?
Well, I just gave a speech. I was supposed to go to Las Vegas to speak to the Association of Fundraising Professionals there. Of course, it moved online. So that talk, which is a case study on a couple of different examples of how I've done my work for a couple of organizations, is available. I guess they recorded it. So if someone was interested, I'm not ready to post the link. So I did that. It was fun because my mother, who is completely non-technical and has never been in an airplane, was able to watch the talk thanks to the people at Episcopal Homes. That was actually pretty funny because she just really did not understand. She did not understand where I was giving my speech from. It was from this dining room, even though she's been in my dining room, but it's been so long that I think she didn't know where I was giving the talk or how they were filming me or anything. It was fun, but it was a blessing to be able to have her tune in. So anyway, that's a talk that talks about my work around origin stories. Most of my work, I was going to be doing some group coaching. I haven't decided to move that online. I'm a high touch, intuitive person who likes to read a room. And so I'm adapting. I'm working instead on developing a workbook of my coaching materials. And then I've been coaching a group of 7 social impact entrepreneurs with the Initiative Foundation. And that's just been really inspiring. So if any of you are hearing the underwriting for Red-Headed Creamery out of Bruton, I'm coaching her and her family business through that work. There's anyway, there's social impact entrepreneurs all around the state, and I'm excited. I want to do more of that, actually, and I am thinking about how I could turn that into a podcast. So I might be looking for a little investment so I could turn that into some future work.
That's wonderful. A little plug for my company. We're having a webinar going on at 10 o'clock today about how to improve your SEO for after the COVID-19 crisis. You can find it elsewhere on the internet, but that's my plug. I really want to get into some of the questions that we have here. One question from Murray Death is, how concerned are you about the public safety challenges in the city's area? Understanding that community, trying to make it appropriate for our question, understanding that community, especially in the South Minneapolis area, the community is really being shifted and altered right now. How is it that you're seeing that the safety concerns are being addressed by our community? How are people looking at identifying and having that conversation around safety?
Well, I can jump in a little bit. My service on the Business Review Council, I've been on that now for, I must be in my 2nd year. And if you're not familiar with the Business Review Council, it's, there's representatives from the whole state, all around the city, of business owners, community leaders, different kinds of perspectives. And there's always a report from, it's run by DSI, and there's always a report from the police. So it's going to be interesting to hear. We have a meeting coming up, but Mr. Henry serves on that and speaks about sort of the work he does with trying to bring the police. One of the things he's done is set up coffee, this is before the pandemic, having the police in the McDonald's at university and having conversations and inviting people to have coffee with them. I think those were really good moves, and I think are really going to contribute to helping us come to grips with issues of safety. But honestly, I don't know how to talk about it right now. I guess that's part of why I talked about my core beliefs around how we do create a sense of safety, belonging, and community. Because it really does matter if we express. I think one of the things I've been so impressed by as I've sat around that council is the degree to which people really want to be in relationship in the community, and don't want to make it an us versus them. And the sincerity of those efforts, and the way, in fact, one of the things I saw was a complete change in DSI's response to the homeless population based on input that we gave through the council about not making people move out of their tents in 5 hours, treating them with a sense of humanity. And so those changes have ripple effects, and I think are powerful to helping us retain a sense of hope. I do see a lot of conversation on the Midway economic groups, Facebook, about finding solutions together, and I think those dialogues are really important. So continuing to surface ideas that are not just reactive are really, really important. So I was impressed and pleased to really see the difference a year made in how we treated one situation. I think that can continue.
That's really great. I'm seeing another question that's kind of on the same wavelength. So many people in the suburbs and other outer areas are areas consider the Twin Cities and the Midway as not as very safe. With COVID-19 and density being an issue, that fear may increase. How do we overcome developing that fear? I think that same wavelength that you were just talking about, Catherine, about communicating that it's not the us versus them, it's not the inner city versus outer city, but how do you invite people in while still being that safe, being safe and following guidelines. So I think you answered that question fairly.
I can speak to it a little bit as somebody who lives in the burbs. I'm in Blaine, and I take a bus to downtown Minneapolis, used to, and the buses were full. And now when I drive by the lot, there are 2 cars there, and that's it. And I haven't, I drive by at the same time every day to drop my kids off at daycare, but it's there's a bus there. And so that bus is probably taking one person, and the later bus is probably taking another person. So what I think, and this is just my kind of perspective on it, is that no matter where we go, when there's dense populations, there's going to be that fear of what's safe. At the same time, it'd be nice to get back into downtown and work downtown, but it's, I get why we can't. And St. Thomas has told us, work from home unless you are essential to be on campus. So I think, my hope is that as we continue to learn more and restrictions are lifted and hopefully things are getting better, we can all get together and be in these more condensed areas. But it's just too soon to, think that the Ozarks is an okay way to live amongst each other, and what was going on there for Memorial Day weekend. But, as somebody who lives up here, I certainly don't look at my trips to the Midway as being anything scary, other than trying to figure out, the light rail system. That's my biggest fear. Sure like going to the turf club and seeing shows there, and even going into the weird basement to have a drink. But it's, I don't fear it too much. And I've got, little kids, they're not going anywhere. So I think part of it's just kind of the stages of how we bring everything back. But as one person in the northern burbs, that can see Canada from his house, I think things are okay. Things will be all right. We'll get over the fears.
Yeah.
I'd be very interested in what the other people still on are thinking. I do have a fundamental question is, what are we actually going to return to? How much of this working at home is going to be what we recognize is more viable, maybe more productive than we thought? These are huge questions, obviously, we know. So what is the future of real estate? What is the future of commercial real estate? What is the future? I should mention one of the projects that we're about to launch for the Creative Enterprise Zone, which has been underway for, Chad knows this, I've been working on it for more than a year. We've talked about bringing a circulator to the neighborhood, and really initially we thought it would be important for the first and last mile challenges of the neighborhood. So we were working with Rob Clapp and Can Wonderland, and those of you who saw our little bus that we have for the Mural Festival, that was an iteration of it. But somehow we got pivoted and got connected to the autonomous vehicle research. Actually, I think it goes back to our relationship with the University Design Center and Tom Fisher. And there's a National Science Foundation grant, a multi-million-dollar grant, to research autonomous vehicles around the state. And we got brought in as an official partner. So we've been knocking on the door of MnDOT for over a year, asking for some funding for that research. And we're now very close to getting it. So we're gonna start with a very small piece of work around the autonomous vehicles and autonomous vehicle shuttles in the neighborhood. But we've pivoted our questions to what is the future of transportation? And we're inviting a futurist to join us at the table, as well as several artists. So we're gonna launch a 3-month research project on that theme. And what I think is so interesting is that while we may not want to be in small spaces in transportation because of the risk of the virus, we may actually need to adapt those vehicles for other purposes, such as deliveries. So we're gonna be asking those questions and exploring that. And then we hope to take that project from the initial research phase to grow it significantly over the next year. assuming that MnDOT still wants to invest in what we're doing. So it's, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where that innovation takes us, and how do we see ourselves coming to work?
Yeah, I can speak for St. Thomas a little bit. Turns out they had been looking into the idea of having more people work from home before this happened. And they evidently have learned that productivity has been really good. And so I think down the road that will ease that idea of allowing more people to work remotely. I have a conference of family business center directors from North America that gets together every year in the summertime. We're supposed to be in Toronto next week, obviously not happening. And so we've all made an entire conference online. And so it kicks off with a session this afternoon. And then next week we have 8 different sessions Monday through Thursday. And I have a feeling we're gonna see more of that now that we've identified that, hey, we can do this and we don't have to pay thousands of dollars each to travel and stay in lodging, and good and bad with that. But I can see some of that going that way. I'm like you, Catherine, the face-to-face is really where the most important work is done, where we can see humans. And I'm very anxious for the day when my work can return that way and we can have 200 people in a room safely. I don't know when that is. I'm planning that it's going to be way off in the future, but it'll be nice, because I think people need that. And again, I'm talking to somebody who's stuck in a basement in Blaine. We need those interactions and to see each other and to emote with each other and shake a hand.
There'll always be a place for those organic networking things. And once we are able to come back, I'm sure there will be an awkward shift at first. I remember when the first rumblings of the pandemic were going on around early March, and people were bumping elbows or bumping feet with each other. I'm sure we'll have to have some type of shift in our engagements with our other friends. But I wanted to touch on something that we were talking about earlier about the overall safety of Midway. As a Midway resident living on the corner of Hamlin and University, essentially, I always like to tell the phrase to people who ask the question, why do you live in Midway? Or how do you feel safe in Midway? And I like to say that you can find danger anywhere you go, but if you look for it, you'll find it. Just like in the suburbs. My car has never been broken into out on the street, but when I was living up in my parents' place in Blaine, it's been broken into 3 times. No matter where you go, it's going to be tough. However, the Midway neighborhood has an overall community, and I think that the business community reflects that demeanor of personality and that overall growth. I think that there's one other question that I know that we are.
I'll follow on that real quick, Don, and put my old TV reporter hat on. A lot of times we hear about things in the news that are closer to the stations where the reporters are. It's an easier hop, skip, and a jump to cover a story as opposed to being out in the suburbs and saying, okay, I've got to drive from KSTP up to Blaine to cover something that is happening similarly here. So I think that's something that you'll see. It's like you said, it's not. I don't feel less safe being in Midway or any other community around our area.
Yeah, I love taking my dog out on walks. We have a path that's about 2 miles that I take every day, and I've yet to see a frowning face. Everyone's smiling, waving, and maintaining that distance. It's a beautiful neighborhood, and I encourage you, if you get the chance, just come and visit. It's wonderful. One of the questions that we have from Tony, I know that we've talked on this a little bit more, but if you have any other ideas that have populated since our conversation has really started, can you share some examples you've heard of how employers are connecting, supporting, and empowering employees in this environment? John, I know that you talked a little bit about this with one of the examples of the survey going out, but have you, I want to ask the question of, have you seen any empowering going on with employers and employee relationships?
I'm kind of going through an old email I sent that has a bunch of You know, one thing, there's a company, a manufacturer that told me early on, the owner opened up his books to all of his employees and just told them, you know, at this point or this point is when we'll need to make these layoffs, and this is what it will look like. So I think there's been some big transparency. And I haven't talked to him in a month or so, but he said that people really rallied around that because they felt that they were all in it together. So that was a big one. I'm looking for another one. You know, people have done newsletters and included their employees in there as more of a get to know you thing. Somebody says communication and being in community play a key role in our business. During these times, we communicate to employees multiple times per week and with at least one video per week. Also did a live virtual town hall video broadcast to connect plants throughout the country. And then they hosted an online concert that was well received for employees, families, and friends, and also gave a monetary voucher. So this is another company that did that. And another family, they do a 15-minute meeting each week with no business discussed, and they focus on faith and bring in a speaker. So I think there's a lot of different things you can do to kind of ground the owners and the employees and kind of re-rally the group that's leading the charge to bring in all the workers.
And Catherine, I'd love to hear your perspective on empowering employees.
Well, I don't know that I have a lot to add there. I think, yes, I think this, one of the things I know is that it's really important that we continue to talk about how we're in it together. And I would add that I think understanding that another way of talking about that is that we're all in the same storm, but we are not necessarily all in the same boat. And I think those two metaphors are really important to unpack. And I do like that idea of transparency, that the more we can let people in on what's going on and make that a shared sense of understanding and purpose is going to make a huge difference. I think figuring out, you know, our trust is being eroded in so many places. And so anything you can do to enhance trust is going to make a big difference. And so everything that you just said, communicating is really important, being intentional about that communication. I'm part of a group of women that gets together monthly. We used to get together in someone's home. Now we get together on Zoom, but you know, we all talked about our routines. You know, there were some real confessions of loneliness, of fears of depression. You know, things were, you know, really emerging on that human scale. And I had put together a little agenda for myself that I put together that starts, the very first thing is to wake up and say thank you. You know, that I have a tradition of getting up at the dawn and celebrating the dawn. And, you know, so for me, anything I can do to follow that, but then the act of sharing those practices is more helpful than we might think. And so asking employees to share that, you know, what are your practices? What are your practices now you're home? I was on you know, you mentioned kids appearing and pets appearing. Those are incredibly great moments. You know, I was facilitating this 3-hour session for the Impact Fellows. And one of the women confessed after the first hour that her 2-year-old grandchild was under the table. And then she, you know, reached down and pulled her up, you know, and I mean, all of a sudden we were finally laughing and just, you know, feeling human with each other. And I think that's a metaphor, like bring the baby from under the table so we can all remember who we are. I think is a great metaphor for the times we're in.
Well, I'll have to take note of one of the things you just shared about waking up and celebrating the dawn. I think I need to frame that with my team, you know, my name being Don. I like to be celebrated.
Yes, you could do that.
So one of the things that my team has been doing is we've had a few birthdays, and being that a lot of my team members are web developers, web designers, and technical SEO experts, Um, I'm being very kind when I say that they fall into the category of being more introverted individuals. And so when they do have a birthday, our ownership team has gone out and purchased a store-bought birthday cake or store-bought cookies, depending on the person and if they like cookies or not. And we have a virtual birthday card that we've signed, and not forgetting that on the other side of the screen that there is another person. I want to echo, I love seeing when the animals pop up, the little kids walk around. I was on a panel, and one of the other panelists had a kid that just walked in the background, and she said, I'm so sorry. I paused the screen, went away, and everyone on the webinar said, no, bring the kid back. We want to see it. I want to see the baby. So we all do have that human element, and it's so important to remember how that is part of our community here in the Midway. I mean, we have this person that we are, and it's so great to see each other in our own spaces, because it adds that more contextual flavor to us. We're not just another pixelated image on the internet. We're all humans going through the same exact experience. And I think we're going to pull out of this in a much better headspace. And Catherine, I really respect what you said about the concerns of depression, concerns of mental problems popping up. I think that with a lot of these Zoom meetings, and especially thanks to the Midway Chamber, we're going to be able to be more connected through organizations like this. So segueing off to Chad, I wanted to say thank you to the panelists for all of your time. I know that we're coming up on our 9:30 mark, but Chad, I wanted to transition back to you. Is there anything or closing remarks that you would like to say?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to remind people about next Thursday's part 3. It's going to be about redesigning life, and it's going to be talking about how office space is going to look differently and how we're going to adjust to our new normal when people do go back into the office. And also talking about community, our other event we have next week. We're bringing our lunch on the line back. We want to support our restaurants right now, and we're going to have a lunch at the patio at Urban Growler next Wednesday. And you can find information over on our website. It's scrolling on the homepage. But if you are interested in that, please register for it today. I want to send the list over of names tomorrow to Urban Growler, because they need to have reservations now. I just want to close by talking about community. You know, St. Paul has a reputation for having really strong neighborhoods, and ones that the residents and people who work there are proud of. There's a lot of pride in our neighborhoods. And, you know, the Midway is a very old neighborhood, and I tell people everything old is new again. You know, you used to have streetcars, now we have light rail. There used to be a Saint Stadium on University in Lexington, and now there is a soccer field, Allianz Field, at Snelling University. So it's interesting how we've come back a little bit to our roots. And there's been so many transformations in University Avenue and the Midway through the years. You look at so many industrial and manufacturing businesses and buildings, and some of that's still there, some of it's being repurposed. You know, look at Prior Works is one of my favorite examples of a building that's old and has been repurposed. Some of that goes back to the 1800s. So it's amazing to see that. My point in mentioning all this is we have a strong community. We have one that's very prideful and proud of being here. This community has been here for the pandemic in 1918, 1919. It's been there through the Great Depression. I feel very confident that the Midway community can come out of this, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else or represent anywhere else than the Midway area. So thank you for all of you who are part of our community. We couldn't be doing this without all the strength that we have in our membership and our residents and our businesses. So thank you.
Thanks, Chad.
All right. With that, thank you and have a good day, everybody.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Great job, John.